welcome from myself, Emily Sun, and Joe Blundell from Place Matters. It's so great to see everyone from all parts of the country. So Place Matters is a partnership organization, and we're all about accelerating the impact of place-based change through generating and sharing learning. Our partners are made up of those that have quite a lot of experience in this area. So that includes Right to Succeed, Global Black Thrive, West London Zone, Government Outcomes Labs, Renesi, and Tamarack Institute in Canada. And today we're really delighted to have us be joined by Jacky Close and David Dorward from Dundee, who are going to tell a really interesting and innovative story about how they worked in partnership to address food insecurity, or addressing food insecurity issues, which we know is now a more urgent issue than ever around the country and many parts of the world. So just wanted to start by thanking David and Jacky for being with us today. Jacky is a director of Faith and Community, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about what they do as an organization. They're based in Dundee. She's also got other hats on at the same time. She's leading on 2 citywide initiatives, working very closely with the local authority and others in the statutory sector, particularly around fairness agenda, which she'll talk a little bit about today, as well as the food insecurity strategy. David wears multiple hats as well, is both the chair and founder of Dundee Bairns, as well as the associate director for Scotland for Rank Foundation. David also brings quite a number of years, I think it's 19, David, of experience as either the director of finance or chief executive of Dundee City Council, so brings a great inside perspective on the local authority as well, and is also chairing a number of other sort of local charities at the same time. So quick introduction, but what I would say is, before we dive in, we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. So as we go through and hear from Jacky and David, please feel free to put in your questions in the chat, and we'll try to collect those together and bring those out at the Q&A session. We'd also love to hear examples of what you're doing in this area in other parts of the country, and sometimes if you are joining from other countries, other parts of the world, to share as well. That would be really interesting to hear. So without further ado, I'm going to go and ask the first question, which is really about sharing a bit about what inspired you both personally to get into the work that you're currently doing. And Jacky, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Emily, and hi, everyone. Just hope it's not quite as cold for all of you. It's -5 in Dundee, so I'm hogging the radiator just now. So yeah, I'm going to go back 30 years to when I was 22, and I was a volunteer at a summer activity camp in Scotland with primary school children, primary school girls. And I'll never forget meeting this girl called Margaret from Glasgow. Margaret got off the bus wearing basically school shoes, school socks, school skirt, and a school shirt, and a plastic bag with another shirt, another skirt, one pair of underpants, and another pair of socks. And she came to this very middle-class camp. She'd been sponsored by a local church to come. And you could see that she was constantly in fight or flight mode. And what I saw over that week was this girl who unpacked some really challenging and difficult stories about her life begin to blossom in a place where she was cared for, in a place where people looked out for her, where the cook, who was an older lady, really took her under her wing and went and bought her clothes. And when Margaret was feeling overwhelmed or a little bit jittery, she'll go into the kitchen and the cook would have her cooking with her and actually trying food she'd never tried before. And by the end of the week, the transformation in that girl was utterly astonishing in 1 week. And I went away from that residential camp feeling very angry about the inequalities that face people in our country that are unfair, and that has driven me ever since. I've never forgotten Margaret. Unfortunately, I tried to find her afterwards, and I've never been able to find her, so I don't know where she has ended up in her life, but I've never forgotten her, and I think of her often because that kind of inequality should not be happening, and that is why I do the work that I do, looking at poverty and inequality in Dundee.
Thanks, Jacky. Thank you. David?
Hi, Emily. Hi, good morning. So what inspired me to do the work I'm doing? I suppose when I was chief exec, I was chief exec for 5 years of the council, and about once every 18 months, I would spend a month visiting every council establishment. So I would leave the director of education back in the ivory tower, and I would go and meet the head teachers as an example. Dundee is the second most deprived area in Scotland. So while visiting particularly the primary schools, the head teachers would tell me about children who'd be coming to school unfed and very poorly dressed. They spoke about during the holidays how concerned they were because many of their children, up to 50%, were on free school meals. And they worried that during particularly the summer holidays, the 6 weeks, that those children were not being fed. And the story they related to me was the head teacher was that the mum gave the little kid £1 in the morning and said, that's you, go and feed yourself for the rest of the day. So I retired, and I couldn't do anything about that while I was chief exec. It's a bit ironic. I retired and I joined the Rank Foundation and attended my first Rank conference in Blackpool in 2016. And I heard a lady called Lindsay Graham speak about holiday hunger, and she literally inspired me to come home to Dundee and to do something about holiday hunger. So I set up a programme called the Fun and Food Programme. When I say I set up, I had no idea what I was doing, right? I was a chief exec, but I usually had a lot of people running around doing things for me. This was me just rolling my sleeves up and going, surely we can do something about this. So, of course, the new chief exec and other people were able to help me. And 6 months later, we ran our first programme during the summer of 2016, and we delivered 20,000 lunches to children throughout Dundee. 6 years later, we'd set up after having, I suppose, proven that worked, we set up the charity called Dundee Bairns. And since 2016, so over 6 years, we've done nearly 500,000 meals. And we do that every school holiday. We do it during the term time. And we're now starting to branch out, or have branched out, into non-food issues where children need extra support, be it clothing or whatever. What keeps me doing this is simply that every week I can go out there and see young children and families living every day in poverty, in schools, in community settings. And if you're doing that, that will keep you doing what we are doing.
Thank you, David. Thank you both for that. So moving then from how you were personally inspired to the work of your organizations, if we dive in first to, with you, Jacky, to the Dundee Community Food Network, it would be great if you could just sort of describe how it came into being through COVID and then how it evolved post-COVID.
Absolutely. So the Dundee Community Food Network is made up of 30 independent community food projects. And that really came about the week prior to lockdown in March 2020. We were already supporting some different community-based food projects. And we had a meeting arranged to meet with the money advisor, the advice services manager in the council, and of course all that got cancelled. But we were speaking to the projects, and as things were beginning to close down, they were saying to us, we can't close down, we need to stay open and we need to do something. So we arranged our first Zoom call, which was on the day that the lockdown was announced. And we brought all the money, all the different community food projects that we knew of at that point into the room. And we also invited senior managers from in the council into the room. And we basically asked our first questions, which remained the questions that we asked every week, which was, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what do you need? And really from that, the network grew. So we started to meet every Monday on Zoom. We started to bring any other people that were providing food across the city together. And we asked those questions every week. And every week we had 3 senior managers from the council in those meetings. And we spent that time listening and then working out how we were going to resource what was needed. Because what we recognised, that these projects were in every local community, were easily accessible, and they already had relationships with people in their community. So they were trusted entry points. They were places people would be okay to go to. And they were run predominantly by volunteers across the city, and they stayed open through every lockdown. So moving on, we continued to meet regularly. The council then recognised that the best way that they could support their local communities was actually to put resources through these projects. And so they decided to procure £10,000 worth of food every week of ambient goods and put that through, get them delivered out through these network projects, because they were already on the ground and they were already engaging with the people that needed it the most. And so that's what they started to do at the end of April 2020, and actually have continued to do that and are still doing it now, because unfortunately, as you know, the crisis didn't really go away. Just at the points where we thought things were tailing off and we were beginning to slow down and numbers were disappearing, it's now escalated. So they're continuing to do that and will do until the end of March 2023. We needed somewhere for that food to go, and so we were really fortunate that a local painter and decorators got on board and said, we have vans, we have men, we have time, do you need anything? And we said, yeah, that would be great. And so what happens is the council would procure the food every week. It got delivered to Alexandra Community Development, where they split it up, and then they spent the week delivering it out to all the food projects. And that became a critical part of the network, because what that meant was when we did things like we would print up leaflets about the Scottish Welfare Fund, which is a crisis grant, or about mental health support, or about anything at all that we printed up, we could put that out through Alexandra Community Development. They would deliver it to the projects and they would get it into people's hands really quickly. So they were quite a key part of the whole network as well. Over that period, all we did was listen. We wanted to know what was happening, what was needed, what was happening, what was needed, and we responded to those needs. So we identified training needs that the projects had, and so we would speak to partners and bring them in to deliver training, whether that was around mental health, whether that was around supporting people struggling with substance use, whether that was around signposting and referring people to money advice services. And then in the last year, it's been much more around food hygiene training, Scottish mental health first aid training. So really recognising what are you needing, and then we would access that training and bring it to them. We also were able to identify kind of ways that were more dignified ways of accessing food. So at the beginning, people were handing out bags of food, and we worked with the projects and began to talk about the dignity principles which Nourish Scotland produce. And we helped the projects begin to adapt their services and adapt their provisions so that it was much more dignified. So what we have in Dundee now is a network that has larders where people can, which is like a pantry, so people can pay a small fee and they can choose the items that they want to take away. We have community cafes where people can eat what they want and pay what they can. And again, these are community hubs where lots can happen. We have drop-ins, which were already, some of these already existed, but we have a much more cohesive and coordinated approach to all of these. So we have drop-ins where people struggling with substance use access very specialised support, but also nutritional healthy food and dental support as well. We have community fridges where surplus food can be accessed, and again, in a very dignified way. It's about tackling the environment. It's not about poverty, but actually what we know is about 85% of people accessing it is about financial insecurity. We brought in food growing groups so that we can try and make sure that food that's grown can go out to the people that need it the most. There are community meals that are being done by different independent groups in different places. And again, we link everybody up around that. And there's also the 2 food banks. And I put them at the bottom of the list, not because they're not important, because if we're talking dignified access, they have to be at the bottom of the list. They have to be the absolute last point crisis. Nowhere else can work. We developed a food insecurity strategy, working with the projects and the network, and we proposed that to the council, who agreed and adopted it. And that's what we're working to now, which is really about taking a cash first approach where we can. So making sure that in whatever way we can ensure that people can access money advice to maximise their income and minimise their debt. So we work very closely with the council advice services managers and teams who work closely with the other money advice services in the city. And we are looking at and developing coordinated approaches across the city, because we want to reduce the number of people needing food support. Unfortunately, we're at 8 times the amount of people accessing food support to where we were a year ago. So we're in a really difficult situation, but we're continuing to work on this cash first approach. We're continuing to work on dignified approaches, and we're also looking continuously at how surplus food can be used in dignified and accessible ways, and can be used to produce healthy meals for people. The last thing I'm going to mention is the WhatsApp group. So it might sound really simple, but we set up a WhatsApp group quite early on, and there's about 70 people on the WhatsApp group, but it's become quite a key tool used by the whole network. And so anytime anybody's got surplus food, they pop it on there, and there's no doubt someone else will say, I'll take that, that's great, and they arrange it between themselves. If people need anything, so we've had times when someone's come on and said, I've got a gentleman who doesn't have a fridge, or his fridge is broken, I can guarantee within an hour someone else will have a fridge for them. So what we've done is created a network that genuinely works together. Now, I can tell you now, 2.5 years ago, half these projects didn't know each other or speak to each other, and there was a little bit of competitiveness in there too. That's all gone. We've brought them together and we've worked really hard with them. We still meet in person 5 times a year. We meet online every 3 to 4 weeks, because we still continue to ask the questions, what do you see, what do you hear, what do you need? And we still have a senior manager from the council at all of the in-person meetings, and we still work closely with the council around how we keep coordinating as much support as we can, and with all the key partners in the area. So I think that's a very brief summary of the network and how we've got to where we are now.
Thank you so much, Jacky. There's so much there, but clearly this idea about the sort of network and how it came into action together and really working collaboratively. But I also love how you've really pointed out the need for this sort of underlying principle of dignity, dignified access to sort of underpin everything that you do. So it's really lovely how it's amazing what, the work that you've been able to do in a short period of time, and the growing need, as you've highlighted. Thanks for that, Jacky. David, can I come to you?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna sort of just follow up a few things that Jacky said there, because she's a very humble person, to be absolutely honest. So the WhatsApp, you cannot overstate the intelligence that brings to that network of 70. So last night I'm looking at, because Dundee Bairns are obviously on it, and we got an offer of 30 tickets for the pantomime, and rather than go to a school, we put that offer on the WhatsApp so that people in the network could have that opportunity to identify children or families who could take that opportunity up. So it goes much wider than food, this. I think the WhatsApp is almost like a community network that's live. The other thing I would say is during when the pandemic broke, so that first 20 weeks, April 2020, Jacky's network, let's call it that, was so successful, and we were part of that, that the Dundee Food Bank, so the Trussell Trust Food Bank, was the only food bank in the United Kingdom that saw a reduction in demand, which I found quite amazing. So what we'd done in the community in terms of getting the food out there was so successful that people were reduced going to the normal source of getting emergency food, which was the food bank. And I thought that was a real measure of the success of the network. So Dundee Bairns, so I've told you how we became established. So what we do now is we provide, in a nutshell, free meals, clothing, activities for children and families in need in the city of Dundee. We started in the summer of 2016 with the lunches, simple cold lunches. We tried hot lunches, but unfortunately the children were too young and they were getting burnt with the ashes that we were putting out. So we decided that was a dangerous thing to do. And anyway, it was summertime, so we went for cold lunches. And gradually, based on feedback from the projects in the community and the community and school workers, we expanded into breakfast during the holidays as well. I think it's important to say that we couldn't do this without the help of the local school meals provider. So they have stood up to the plate for 6 years now and said, we'll make sure we have staff available to provide these meals during the school holidays. So that was only based on a relationship that I had with the managing director. He saw the benefit of this and was able to say, we will commit to this. That is our corporate social responsibility, if you like. And that's what's happened then. Eventually, the schools came to us saying, this is working well during the holidays, but we have children who we know are coming to the school and fed in the morning. So we started breakfast. They also said, we know there are children going home who do not get a hot evening meal. So in 2017, we started what we call our tea club. Now, it's not a homework club because the head teacher said you won't get the kids to stay. So we put on activities that make them want to stay at the club, and we give them a 2-course hot evening meal. So we started with 5 of those in 2017, and this year we're up to 18 of them throughout the city in 2022. Again, we wouldn't be able to do this without the support of the schools. I think the other thing is that since then, we've come across issues. Obviously, the pandemic was a real issue for us in terms of people being in their own homes. So as part of the network, Jacky's network, we did our 2 weeks school holidays in April 2020, and then we started delivering groceries to hubs. So we did £120,000 worth of groceries to families directly in their own homes. I have to say that during that period, getting funding from the public and from funders was extremely straightforward. I received a cheque through the door for £25,000 from an anonymous donor. They knew what we were doing, people knew what we were doing, and I think they were very generous. And I think the other thing during the COVID period was volunteers. Because people were furloughed, they wanted to do something to help, and they came forward. The downside of that is, of course, they all went back to work, and then we had a dearth of volunteers. But anyway, that was a really good thing. Recently, what we've started to do is, because we only had one supplier of food, being Tayside Contracts, the local food provider for the schools, we've opened our own kitchen, which is a bit of a dramatic thing to do. So we're now a food provider directly. We have a chef employed, coincidentally, by Alexander's Community Development. I think you've got to understand the size of Dundee. It's only 140,000 people. We are a village. So suddenly you see Alexander's doing what they're doing with the food network, and you go to them saying, could you help us open up a kitchen? Yes, of course we can. There is a real community spirit there, and it just needs to be tapped, frankly. Christmas holidays were always a problem for us because Tayside Contract staff were on holiday. So children are still going to be hungry during the school holidays. So how we got around that was by vouchers. So we now issue Aldi vouchers. Aldi don't do cigarettes and don't do alcohol, so we can give a voucher. So this Christmas, it started off 100 families in 2020 or 2019. And this Christmas, we're up to 650 families, about 3,000 children we're helping with vouchers for Aldi that they get. Now the vouchers are a very, very, back to Jacky's point about dignity, a very dignified way of making sure you're supporting people. A very important point here is the schools will tell us which families need the support. And we know then that we are providing the most targeted support we can to families who are definitely in need. And we take the vouchers to the school as an example, and they distribute them very discreetly in a way that, you know, it doesn't make people feel that they're receiving charity, frankly. And that's to me, that's quite important. And the last thing I want to say is, we thought we were only going to be involved in food until a local councillor came to us and said, really, really worried that under COVID, the Scottish Government said we must do all our PE outside, we must have all the windows open, etc., etc. And she was worried about children being very cold and going to school who had inappropriate clothing, footwear, etc. So we started a project called Cozy Bairns, where we would go out and buy new clothing. So it wasn't, you know, handed down from somebody else. This was new clothing. And in 2020 and 21, we've delivered at least up to £100 worth of clothing and footwear to 5,000 children in those 2 years. We're doing it this year, but unfortunately, and I think this will be a common theme, the council, they provided 50% of the funding for that. They cannot do it this year. Therefore, we're having to scale back a little, but we still have 800 referrals for clothing vouchers this year. The first year we did it, of course, all the clothing shops were shut. So we had to go to Tesco with a large van and buy 2,000 children's clothing for individual children, which was we should have had somebody from the army helping us with this, a logistical general or something would have been great. Now we give them a pre-marked voucher for £100. They go and they select the clothes that they want. And I think that's very important, that dignity point that Jackie made. Whatever we do, we try to make sure that it's done in the most dignified way, that people are getting the same opportunities as every other child, and they are not standing out, if you like, or being identified by their peers in any shape or form. So how are we able to keep going? Because Rank, one of the funders, is very generous, because we've built up relationships with local funders. The council have come round to our way of thinking and now use us unashamedly. And volunteers. I think without volunteers in the community, both providing the projects where the meals are delivered to and also helping with the clothings, we would never be able to do this. And yeah, one quote I love from the council is, during COVID, we reacted too quickly for the council. So we were already out there with Jackie providing meals, etc. And the council were still planning what they were going to do. And that's a common theme we've come across. And now the council respect that and know. The council leader, Jackie and I were at a meeting recently, he said, I want action, not plans. You can plan and plan and plan. But during COVID and the cost of living crisis, time is of the essence and you must move quickly. And that, as a charity, I found that easier to do than I ever did when I was chief executive of the council.
Thank you so much, David. Again, so much in there, and luckily we've got a bit more time to dive in. But again, there's so many themes, but the power of sort of joining up the dots between commercial and businesses, volunteers, the council, the community groups, the schools, just amazing coordination and collaboration there. But I also love the other theme that really comes through very strongly, which is the quickness with which you learned, adapted, and responded to the changing needs. You know, there was so much learning that was going on in a very, very dynamic way. So thank you for that. And I know in speaking earlier with both of you, and you've mentioned it several times today too, there were kind of three themes that came through in terms of what really enabled you to be able to respond to the needs so effectively. One was sort of the funders approach, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The second was around the sort of strength of the community networks coming together, collaborating, not competing. And then the third one was about partnership with local authority and how that evolved. So taking those in turns, I'd love to dig a bit deeper and talk a little bit about the funders approach. And Jacky, I'm going to bring you in and sort of talk about what in the funders approach really enabled you to be able to respond in the way that you did.
Yeah, so David and I really met through the Rank Foundation place-based funding that came into Dundee way before the pandemic. And so this was funding that came in and funded 22 projects. I'm looking at David, I can never remember the exact number, but all of us together at the same time. And that programme brought us together regularly throughout the year into steering groups where we built relationships with each other and we got to know each other's work, but where we also got to know senior staff, senior sort of executives from the Rank Foundation. And we built really strong relationships and got to know each other. And those relationships were really critical to how that funding was then shared with us. So it's core funding. And one of the things that I think is really challenging in the third sector is it's quite easy to get project funding. So if you've got a good project idea, you can cost it out and you can get funding for that. But core funding is really, really hard to get. And nobody wants to fund the manager. Nobody wants to fund your bookkeeper who keeps your finances right. And, you know, but actually, if you didn't have those people, you wouldn't have those projects. So what I liked about Rank Foundation place-based funding was that they trusted us, they built the relationship with us, they saw the ethos and the approach and the kind of core outcomes we were aiming to, but they weren't prescriptive about the activities we tied towards those outcomes, and they allowed us the flexibility to be responsive. And to have that ability to be responsive totally changes the way you can work as an organization. And to have that trust, to be trusted as a leader, and to be trusted as an organization, again, can totally transform the way that you work as an organization. But also those relationships that you build, not only with members of the Rank Foundation, but also with your fellow organizations in the city, that all set us up so that when the pandemic hit, we were in a very different place. We had relationships across the city that we wouldn't have had without that capacity that was provided by the Rank Foundation and that core funding, and that freedom to build those relationships and invest in all that meant at the critical point, we could hit the ground running because we knew who to get in the room and we were able to call them into the room at the right time because we had those relationships. So I would say really that was essential to how we were able to then continue. And also Rank Foundation were excellent at listening. I think they really listen and hear what's happening and then they respond to that. So they were very good. And they were one of the funders. I mean, funders were very good during that period, but they were exceptional because they knew us and had that relationship and listened a bit deeper. And they were the first ones to put out to all their member organizations and say, if you're having to work from home, do you need stuff? And here's a grant to get stuff like office chairs for at home and things to put your laptops on, the kind of stuff that you actually need, but you don't have because you've had to just basically empty your office and rush home. So some of those practical things were fantastic. But that came out of listening and really paying attention. And so I would say all of those factors really helped us to be in a place where we could respond better and have the right relationships in place and know that we were trusted to take forward work that was core to what we were about, but we could build it in whatever way we wanted.
Super. Thank you. Thank you for that, Jacky. David, I'm going to bring you in. I know, of course, part of your role is working, with Rank directly, but you mentioned some things around the pebble and the pond approach, and I thought you could explain that a little bit more.
Sure. Can I just go back to how that first sort of place-based system works? So Rank did not put any conditions on these grants. They were unrestricted. They were part of a programme. The condition they put on it that you had to meet quarterly. And those meetings were absolutely instrumental in bringing together projects who, as Jacky said, had never worked together in the past. They met quarterly, and basically it was to say what they were doing individually. But the biggest thing that came out of it was they said, how can I help you as a project? So that's 20 of them to one project. And also, I need help. Can any of you help me? And that happened on a quarterly basis. And the things that came out of that kind of conversation being held quarterly would never have happened. And the relationships grew and grew and grew. At the end of 3 years, we went back to Rank and said, can you fund this for another 2 years? And they did. And out of it, they had to make new projects, if you like. The projects put in new bids. 4 of them combined, 2 and 2 combined to actually put in projects. So Amina, which is a Muslim women's group, combined with the B&A, right, to produce a project where the women went and actually did the narrating of the museum in different languages. And that kind of initiative would never have happened but for the relationship building. Probably the most relationship building and that's brought the greatest thing is Jacky and Faith in the Community. So that funding that went in there has borne fruit way beyond. So the pebble in the pond and the ripple is, yes, initial funding giving to the place, but you trust the projects, you give them the freedom to develop, the freedom to make their own relationships. And what we found is new projects came out of it, new charities came out of it. So Dundee Bairns is one of them, but other charities have formed simply because of the Rank funding being there for not their charity, but for other charities and projects. And that pebble in the pond has certainly had ripples way beyond the original 21 projects. So I'm a great believer in place-based because of what we've seen here in Dundee and how it's helped us. When the pandemic struck, I think that was the thing about funders. I've never seen that before. Funders were coming to projects and Faith in the Community and the Bairns and saying, how can we help you to do your work during the pandemic? So it wasn't a case of us going out to funders, they were actually knocking on our doors. Now, I have to say there is a stark comparison with what happened during the pandemic and what's happening during the cost of living crisis. I am not seeing that same response from funders. I'm seeing, in some cases, funders saying, we would like to up your grant by 10%. Well, that's wonderful. But if it's a project-driven grant, that is not going to help us to keep the doors open. So, I think there's a different response needed for the cost of living than what we received from COVID, which was absolutely fantastic. Jacky and I couldn't have done the things we did during the pandemic without the funder support. And we didn't need to ask in many cases. They came and offered. So funders are so important, but I think funders need to look in the mirror just right at this moment and say, what is the best way that we can help projects on the ground during the cost of living crisis? Because the reality is, Jacky and I have experienced it, 2 community projects going out of business in the last week, simply because they couldn't get the funding for the core costs. Not about providing special projects, the core costs to keep going. And I think funders need to really have a hard look at that.
Thanks, David. And I know we'll come back to the fact that, COVID was intense, but we have headed into another very, very intense crisis. So let's circle back on that. And you talked about the role of the funder. You touched upon the importance of the community networks coming together and how the funder really enabled that in this case. The other let's go to that second point, the connected community sector. And Jacky, I'm going to just bring you in on this one if you had anything to add. And in a way, it sort of answers a question that I think Layla brought out in the chat, which is, what are some of the essential ingredients to good collaboration? So Jacky, could you say a bit more on what were those essential elements of helping the community sector get connected so well?
Yeah, I think probably that Danny, who works with me on this, and I, we're almost like Switzerland. We're neutral. So we're very neutral. We don't run a project. We don't deliver a project. So our role with the network has always been a neutral one. And so we currently work with probably about 30 to 32 community food projects. We work with, and I can't even number the amount of partners we work with. And obviously we work with the closely with the council as well. There's definitely been points in the last 2 years where we have had to have quiet conversations in the background with people to sort of get them really to reflect on why they said those things on WhatsApp, or why they're being quite negative about this other community project. So a lot of what we did was about building those relationships and helping them build relationships with each other. So taking away that competitive element and recognizing the importance of working together to get the best we can for our local communities. And we took that right down to the level of, because we have the relationships, being able to work in each individual area and work with the projects in those areas and start to talk about what is it that you're delivering and how can we change the times and the places you do that, so that actually you're not all overlapping. And now in Dundee, in every area in Dundee, whatever the food provision is in that area, it works collaboratively. They don't overlap. So we have a city-wide view. We can look over the whole city and see the patterns. So we're not immersed in one community. We can see the patterns. We can see in this area, there's a bunch of them doing everything Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and nothing Monday, Tuesday. So we can have those conversations, bring them together, reflect with them what they want for their community, which is the same thing, and help them to make changes and work together and recognize actually that works for everybody. And so that is the shifts we've been able to make. And that comes from, and I'll say this word repeatedly, relationships. We have taken time over years and years to build these relationships. And it is through funders giving us the space to do that and giving us the capacity to do that. But we actually had to proactively seek out relationships and build them and take time to listen to people in whatever sector they're in, because I don't know in the future when we might need each other. So I take that time and I invest that time, and even when I'm at my most stressed, which I probably would say in the last few weeks I have been, I took time last week to have a 45-minute conversation with a senior manager in the council who's really struggling. And I knew it and I could hear it in her voice. And I thought, I need to pause and just say, how are you? And that was 45 minutes later, we got to the reason we were on that call. But I know that and I mean it when I ask those questions, we have that genuine relationship, that we will work better together because of that. So for me, it's about those relationships, and it was about building them across all the different sectors. The other thing to mention is a local funder, Northwood Trust, were incredible, and just instantly were saying, what do you need from us as well? And David and I ended up on a call every Monday for 6 months to the two main people in Northwood Trust, every Monday on this I've never been in a call where there's 4 of you on the phone, but every Monday at the same time, because they wanted to know on a Monday morning, we were in the network meetings, they wanted to know what we were hearing, what we were seeing, and how that might help them. So really it's about ensuring the voices of those who are in communities experiencing this day by day are heard by the people that allocate the resources, that make policy decisions and service decisions. And that's at the heart of not just the network work, but also our work with our Fairness Commission work as well. How do you make sure voices are heard, but not just heard, but listened to and responded to? And so the relationships have to make that happen. And we sit almost as a conduit for that, to make that work.
Thank you. It's so helpful to hear the specifics of how the collaborations work, because it sort of takes the cover off. We need to collaborate, which everyone knows, but sort of understanding what it takes to get to those levels of collaboration. And you both mentioned the term investment a few times, the funders investing in your time and ability to get together and insisting that you come together. So the funders are saying, we're not just here to fund programs or organizations, but to almost fund the sector itself. So how do we help grow the whole sector of the community sector within Dundee? And then you personally investing the time, having those quiet conversations when bumps happen along the road, as they do, within a collaboration, or investing time in building those personal relationships. So that word investment seems to be something that we cannot overestimate here in that context. Thanks, Jacky. Finally, we're going to talk about, well, not finally, second to last thing is about the role and partnership with local authorities. And David, if I may, actually, no, I'm going to come to Jacky first and then go to David, because Jacky was going to share a few things that you're doing with the local authority, and then come to David around some tips and advice on building those relationships. Jacky, can I come to you about how you're currently working with the local authority and how that really helped the partnership to move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So our relationship with the local authority goes back right to prior to when I started in this role. But we, since 2015, have been leading on fairness commissions in the city. So bringing together people with lived experience of poverty and leaders within the city to work collaboratively over an 18-month period and to really address the kind of main drivers of poverty in the city, and to help the leaders within the city to think about their responses and their service and resource provision and how they can adapt and change and improve that, so it really makes a difference on the ground. So when we hit the COVID pandemic, we had those relationships quite high up within the council, including the leader of the council, the current chief executive of the council, and other senior managers. So it wasn't hard to bring them into the room because they understood the concept of listening and the difference that made. So bringing them into the room at that point wasn't too complicated. But actually what's been great is they've stayed in the room, they haven't left. So we're 2.5 years on, and we still have we've always got a senior manager in the council in all of our meetings because they want to know what's going on. We're still doing our fairness work, or we're doing an innovative new thing, a fairness leadership panel. So we still work closely with those individuals within the council and other sectors in the city. But I think we've been very fortunate because, you know, the council have committed to still putting out the procured food through the network. They've committed to and recognise, they've committed their local locality teams to work with the local projects and build those locality strengths as well. So they've actually picked up our model of that locality-based and citywide based approach and adopted that. And they've taken on our strategy as well and are adopting that. And so we're in conversations constantly with them about that. Recently, the leader of the council had a cost of living crisis summit. I was invited to be the lead for the food section of that. And so I lead on that. So they come to me and they say, right, we're going to give an extra pot of 50,000. We want you and the network to decide how that's spent through the network. So we then go and bring everyone into a meeting. I had a consultation with the network. They decided we want to spend that money on vouchers. We want to spend that money on this, 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 and this. I put that back to the council, they've approved it, and now that money is going out and the projects are able to then over this winter put extra into people's pockets to give them what they need. So we still have that resource relationship, but it's not just about money, it is about how you work together. It's about how they adapt and listen and think about how are we supporting people while their resources are being stripped and reduced. So, you know, we've got to recognise across every sector, we're all facing our own resource crises. So we working together and listening to each other. I'm recognising where they're struggling. And so we're all trying to work to get the best that we can. So I think the strategic conversations we're still having are critical. We've got a big meeting in January because the council will have no more funding come March to get this procured food. And they're panicking, they're terrified because they know that people are struggling and they want to help. And they're saying, we can't do it unless we get national support. So we're going to be meeting to talk about, well, what can we do and how do we do the best we can do? But the day before that strategic meeting, we're meeting with the network to ask them the same question and say, right, what's your ideas? How do we work better together? What things are you doing that we can share and learn from each other? We'll take that into that meeting and drive that forward that way. So we've had a really good relationship with the council and feel very, very fortunate. We are not unaware that we're in a very, very fortunate position in Dundee. Yeah.
Super. Thank you, Jacky. It's not often that you hear community organizations saying, what can we do for the local authorities? It sounds like you've been able to build a real two-way partnership there. Thanks, Jacky. David?
Yeah, well, I can go back to when I was part of the council then and try and look at it from that end of the telescope. So when I became chief exec, what we had was a very paternal relationship, i.e. the council would award grants on an annual basis, make cuts and grants on an annual basis to a third sector that saw us simply as a grant maker, yeah? I decided to change that. So I brought the third sector into the room and said, I want you to decide where we're going to make this 5% cut in your grants and let them get on with it. But we also built up a better relationship in that they knew what we were trying to do as a council, but more importantly, much more importantly, we got intelligence on what was happening on the ground that we couldn't get sitting in our ivory tower. And that was so important. But you started then to break down the walls and build up a relationship with the third sector. So that goes way back to 2009, probably. I think when we had periods where local authority cuts were not being made, that relationship was less required, frankly. And the council could go about its daily business not oblivious to what's the third sector were doing, but knowing that it was happening. I think over the last 5 years in particular, that has changed dramatically because the local authority has had to look at cutting services, non-statutory services, that invariably impact on the third sector. They are aware, much more aware, that those cuts have a direct impact on the local community, on local individuals. And one way of trying to ameliorate and make sure those cuts are not having such a dire effect is to ensure that the third sector are doing everything they can, and they support them in it, the council, to make those cuts less sore. Let's put it that way. My relationship with the council is slightly different from Jacky. So yes, in Dundee Bairns, we wouldn't have started without the council's help. But I suppose what I've learned is we became a bit of an irritant. Yeah, so we were challenging them and being aggressive with them in terms of why were they not providing breakfast clubs and why were you charging £2 a child for breakfast clubs, because you know most of the families we were supporting couldn't do that. I would advise you not to do that, right? That is a bad starting place for a relationship, is to antagonise the council. And what I'm talking about here as well, there's two parts to any council. There's the officers who absolutely you have to build a relationship with. Absolutely. And how you do that is it's not a one-day wonder. As Jacky says, this is a real relationship where you're interested in them, they are interested in what you're doing, and they will call on you when they need help. You will call on them. It's a friend. You're trying to get friends within the council. That's what you're trying to do. And why are you doing it? To benefit the community. And the council officer will see that the same way if you can build that relationship. And it might be a relationship that actually bears no real fruit, let's say, for 2 or 3 years. But if you don't start doing that and knocking down those walls, then it won't be there when you need it, as in COVID. And the cost of living crisis, to be honest. The other part of the council is the councillors, a bit more transient. They get replaced every 5 years. They worry about elections. But if you can go and find councillors like the one who came to us saying, I'm worried about the Bairns being cold, then that's a gem to find. The leader of the council just now is a gem. We will not always have a leader of the council who is so open to hearing what's happening on the ground. He knows it. He's living it, frankly. Those relationships are so important. If you cannot break into the council and get those types of relationships, it's going to be very difficult to do the kind of stuff that we've heard about today that Jacky and myself are doing.
Super. Thank you, David, for that sort of very helpful words of wisdom. So we've covered three things so far, the sort of ingredients for enabling this kind of work to come together. The first is around the role of the funder, type of funding. The second around sort of the collaborative nature of the community groups coming together. And the third, working with the local authority. The fourth that I'd like to stick in here, which you haven't mentioned, is the kind of leadership that's really helpful to enabling collaborations. And Jacky, you kind of alluded to it in some of your stories, but at risk of embarrassing the other, I'm going to ask you, David, to talk a little bit about what in Jacky's leadership really helped the collaboration work and come together, and the same thing of Jacky to David.
It's kind of difficult to explain leadership, isn't it? You know it when you see it and you feel it, but how do you actually put it into words? When I first met Jacky in 2015, she headed up Faith in the Community, which I think had one member of staff in her. So it was a very small organisation, not well known by the local authority. So that was in 2015. We're only talking 7 years ago. That's where Jacky was at that point in time. Since then, she's built relationships within the Rank Foundation, within the 21 projects, within the city, and within the council. And you can sense that those relationships, and I think people, it's her ability to bring diverse groups together to produce strong networks. Now, why do those groups come together? And that's because they trust her. She's honest and authentic with them, and they trust what Jacky is saying. When Jacky says she's going to make something happen, it happens. And she worked so hard at those relationships and so hard at delivering what she sees on the ground. That story about Margaret and how it started is lived every day in the relationships she has with the whole panoply of, you know, the council, the community groups, individuals. And yeah, I cannot, the fact she brought the Fairness Commission together, to me, is a wonderful example. So the council, and it was in my day, we set up a Fairness Commission, but how do you get people with lived experience who are living in poverty just now to come together as a group and to speak to the leaders of, you know, the health board, whatever, and feel confident that they can do that and trust? And it's only through Jacky developing those people's confidence and they trust her that they've been able to do that. And I love the idea that, you know, the first cohort of the Fairness Commission are now, as they put it, holding the council's feet to the fire for what they said they were going to do. And that is down to Jacky and the trust that she has built up and developed with all those organisations. So to be a true leader, you need to have people follow you. If you're not a true leader, there's nobody behind you following you. And Jacky has a lot of people in the city who are following her.
Thanks so much, David. Again, sort of getting into the granularity of what Jacky has been able to do and the way in which she does things that's been really helpful for the community. Jacky, can I come to you?
Can I just add that? I think during COVID, the very first day, the first person on the phone and the first person to take the lead on what are we going to do to support families was Jacky. And she was on the phone to lots of people, let me tell you. So by 9 o'clock, she probably had a dozen people working on what are we going to do.
That was the first day of lockdown. Unbelievable.
Yep, first day of lockdown.
Yeah.
Talk about taking initiative. See, for example. Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. That was very kind of you. I think leadership, you're right, David, it's hard to describe it, but I think good leaders are critical and how we are, and thoughtful leadership. So I think 3 words I would associate with David are integrity, compassion, and commitment. And, you know, again, with David, what you see is what you get. You know, there's no guile about him. He is who he is, and he will say what he thinks. And that's really important, because I think people then learn to trust, and trust is critical in this. You learn to trust that person because you know that they're not trying to manipulate or find a way around, or trying to find a way that they can use you or be used use your resources. So I think that's quite critical. But I think within that integrity and at the heart of this is David's genuine compassion. So, his story of being chief exec of the council, but actually going out and listening to people and taking that time and stepping away from the officiousness of that role to take time to hear people and really think about what is it that's happening and how are we needing to help people in that situation? How do we help children in that situation? And I think you combine that integrity and that compassion, and then you add into that someone who is the former chief exec of the council, so has all the relationships, all the connections, and David never exploited them in a negative sense, but actually took advantage of those relationships and got those people to sit down and listen at the points they needed to listen. And the reason they listened to him is because he listened to the people who were in real need and really needed that support. So you throw in integrity and compassion and then commitment. I mean, I've never seen anyone who's retired who works as hard as David does. I mean, really, the retirement is a joke. If it's only retirement from paid work, yeah, but not retirement in any other sense. But that commitment to seeing change and to using every single influence that you have, every single resource that you have, every single sort of conversation and relationship you have to make change happen in the city. And it has changed the conversation in the city, and the approach to child poverty is different, and the approach, the recognition of children's struggles, family struggles out with school times have made a massive difference. But people listen to David because he is a listener, and they know that he'll carry through what he's going to do. And he's very, very driven. And a lot of people, I mean, the support for Dundee Bairns has been huge because David is speaking up and saying what needs to be said. And David talks about his role in the council now as a negative one. I see it as a really positive one. He's not frightened to be challenging. He's not frightened to ask those really difficult questions or to really push when push is needed. And I have been in meetings where David has asked the awkward question, and it's been good because we need those questions asked, because otherwise people get complacent. Councils, if they don't change regularly, end up being quite complacent. We need to keep pushing and asking those hard questions. And the questions that David asks are not born out of nothing. They're born out of listening and knowing this needs to be asked. Action needs to happen, and we need to get things done and do it now. So David drives others to move faster than they would otherwise. So I think that is that kind of influence and being able to do that with compassion and integrity is really critical to how things are where they are now.
Thanks, Jackie. I'd just add there, I would be careful about picking your fights. So I was far too blasé with my comments sometimes, and that was to the detriment of the charity, right? So just be careful. You've got to build that relationship. There is no point in saying something because it's the right thing to say and finding that you've put that officer behind the 8 ball, or you've embarrassed that officer or whatever. So you've got to think of the broader thing here. I could say that to that person face to face, not in a public meeting. Just hold your fire. There's a time and a place. You want to spend more time building the relationship than showboating, frankly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Such incredible judgment involved in knowing when to cajole and when to push a bit. But underlying all of that, I suppose, is the importance of building a true relationship wherever you can. I'm going to move us on a little bit. Thank you for both of that. It's very inspiring to hear. And just to situate ourselves about sort of in the cusp of getting into the new year with all the challenges that you see on the ground. And what you think needs to happen from community organizations, from funders, from local authorities to address the challenges that you see upon us.
Yeah, so I think it's brutal at the moment. I'll not lie. I've been in this sector for 25 years and I've never seen anything like this. I think we're in a better place in Dundee than we would have been 3 years ago. So we've got an infrastructure that was born out of COVID that does make it easier and better for us to work together. And I think we're doing the best we can do in Dundee. I'm not going to lie. I think we are doing the best we can do. I don't think that could change unless resourcing changed. The council's still putting £10,000 a week of food out. The projects are still hugely based in the localities, working together, doing the best they can. We still get the support from ECD to get those logistics, including surplus food, moving around the city. But you feel the weight as a third sector organisation as the resources get stripped more and more from statutory sector. You feel that weight sliding onto your shoulders, and we're breaking. And without core funding, we're going to close. We are not going to have the right number. All these organisations, so many of them will close within the next 2 years. And I think that's my fear, is that as we look ahead, we're going to see some real challenges of these really important third sector organisations making critical differences in their local communities, but struggling because they just can't fund the core stuff. Everything's more expensive. I've got project funding for projects that we run, and when I put the budget in, we're now in a very different place. So I have massive shortfalls that were not predicted. But you've got holes in your funding before you even start looking at core funding, and that's for projects. So there's real issues as we go ahead. So we really want funders, please, core funding, please build relationships and trust the organisations and put core funding out there, because that will help us survive. And we will adapt our projects and make them work, but we need to have the core people to do that. And we need the government. I mean, the bottom line is we're all stuck, and without our UK government making radical policy changes, we're stuffed basically. So it's a bit grim at the moment. It's not great, but collaboration, we're very grateful to have the relationships we have. They're helping us look after each other and get each other through this as much as and do the best we can for our city. Yeah.
Thanks, Jacky. David?
Yeah. I think, we've got to think of, we've got to be innovative here, and that includes the council. So I think the leader, he had a cost of living summit that Jacky and I was at. He made it clear that this wasn't a talking shop, and it was about action. And I agreed with him and said some of the action is the council have to change the way they're doing things. So you can't afford to keep doing things the way you're doing it. So let's find other ways that we can help you, you can help us, new ways of doing it. So the mother of invention, that's what we're talking about here, because Jacky's right. In 43 years I was in local government, I've never, and 9 years since I retired, I've never seen anything like I'm seeing in the community just now. And it's only going to get worse over the next 6 months. So you're going, well, we've got to think of smarter ways that we can help and ask people, what kind of help do they need? So it's not that a parental, I'm going to tell you what's good for you. You've got to ask people how you can help them in the community as well. I think the council are open to change because they're frightened that they don't have the funding. They're going to have to make cuts that are going to really be serious on people's lives, children's lives. And they are looking for any help that they can get from the third sector to make those cuts as painless as they can be. But that's not going to be easy, frankly. It's not. I think funders need to also look at the way that they can help. So traditional ways of offering grant may not be the best way of doing it here. I think charities might need to start amalgamating because they might be stronger together. So that thing about collaboration applies to the charities and projects themselves. I know two charities I chair where we're going, I think we need to actually combine and collaborate with another charity and reduce our costs, our overheads that way, in order that we can keep providing the service. But Jacky's right. I think less project financing, we need more core financing from the funders. And the funders need to, it's not just all about funding, is it? They need to try and make sure that they collaborate with us as well.
Yeah.
I think the council is the biggest challenge here, I think, because you know what? The staff in the council are tired. They've been through a heck of a journey as well. But usually when people are tired like that, they're open to help. And I think that's where that hand of friendship and the relationship is. We can get through this cost of living crisis if we work together, third sector and officers. And you've got to really reach out. Jacky said it there, an officer who she knew was low. So they've been through COVID and the cost of living crisis. They're now going through cuts. They're being asked to do more with less money. Those people need a helping hand as well. And that's an opportunity. That is a real opportunity for us to make those relationships that we were talking about.
Absolutely. And I think that those themes of, let's not hide from the fact that it's looking really and feeling brutal for many, many people out there. But secondly, that there's no way out of this without thinking innovatively and creatively about how we can work differently together across these sectors. So thank you for that. That in itself is a whole nother probably series of workshops and webinars that we can hold on this question. But I want to invite people to come in with their questions as well and share their ideas. But 1 minute for each of you. Could you just sort of summarize maybe what's the key learning that jumps out for you personally that you've gained that is maybe some of the more significant learning over the last few years that you've been involved in your work?
Less than a minute, relationships. That's it. That's it. That's all I'll say. Invest in them. It's worth it. Because when it comes to those key moments, it's relationships that make things happen.
We can do more in the community working together than we can individually.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And a joint lesson at that, joint learning. Super. Well, thank you both so much. I mean, there were so many things that you covered there and so much to think about. But I'd like to bring in some of the other questions. That there've been some great questions along the way. And Charlotte, can I start with you? And then we'll pick up some from the chat as well. Charlotte?
Sorry, I'm having a few tech issues. It's either camera or sound, so hopefully it'll go. First of all, thank you, Jacky and David. Absolutely brilliant. Really, really interesting discussion this morning. So genuinely, thank you. And I suppose I've got loads of questions, but the one I'm going to go with, which I hope isn't a throwing you under the bus kind of awkward conversation that you want to try and avoid, David, in terms of relationship building. But I was really interested about the Primark vouchers. And actually, as part of like the bigger picture, why Primark? And I suppose in my head, I was thinking about, I know it's a really hard one, but I suppose I was thinking about, how we've got food security, and then how do we look at circular economy and other things, and how does one kind of support the other? So we're not just looking at single issues in terms of communities. And I just wondered what the rationale was behind that, and if there was a conversation to be had about what other ways we could do it.
Well, sorry, we did do it in the clothing was, we asked the school workers. They're very important. They know the children who need it. So they came back to us and said, this is, here's a list of children, their age, their shoe size, etc., etc. And we did all that. And it was the worst month of my life. I spent a month packing clothes into little bags for Jeannie and Jimmy. And so it went, and we delivered them to the school. And we decided it was the most inefficient way to do it. So why wouldn't you give the child the opportunity to go and choose their own clothing? Is that what you meant, Charlotte? So to us, it was a far more dignified way of doing it.
No, sorry. I probably worded the question wrong. The choice thing, I'm completely on board with, and the dignity. Right. It should always be about choice. Yeah, I suppose for me, I'm thinking about the fact that a lot of Primark clothes come from India and China, and they might have a bit of a checkered past in terms of their own poverty in their own countries. Just looking at the wider issue around circular economy for clothes, I just wondered if it had been thought about, or was it, God, we just need to get these clothes to these kids because actually that's the thing we need to tackle right now.
It was freezing We had the money, we had to get them out. Primark were the first shop to open in the city.
Yeah.
It was all very pragmatic things, but I mean, the end objective was to get the clothing to the kids, frankly. Other considerations, if we'd had the time, we would have brought in, but frankly, to get the kids clothing as quickly as we could was by far outweighed any other considerations. And I think there's a story in there about being focused. Getting the outcome is the most important thing. So getting the clothes on the back of the kids, getting the kids' stomachs full, that was it. Whatever we've got to do that, do. And if we'll have to, hurt a few feelings on the way, then I'm sorry, that's what happens.
Thank you, David.
Good challenge though, Charlotte, and a really good question. I think, Jacky, you had a thought about that too.
Thank you.
The circular economy.
Yeah, so we've got funding that's coming out through the projects just now, and one of the things we met and talked to them about, they talked about using getting vouchers from local butchers and grocers. So that's how we've set that funding up. We've put it out to them saying you can get this funding, but we would encourage you to use it for local, again, circular economy within the city and supporting local businesses, but also giving people that choice. But I think it's easier with food. I think it's not so easy with clothes because Dundee, as with most cities, it's not a big city. We don't have a lot of options and a lot of places are closed. So it's easier with food because there's still some of those small local businesses to access. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, one of the considerations with the food is proximity to source. Yeah. So people, if they're in that situation that they're struggling for food, don't have the money to pay for the bus fares or the taxis or whatever, and therefore try to make sure you've got a wide network within the city, whoever it was we were choosing.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Jacky, can I come to you? And thank you for your comments throughout.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much. Amazing work. I know Dundee. It was a long time ago when I visited. And one of the things that occurred to me while Charlotte was talking actually was, you know what? In Scotland, you've got amazing people with wealth of skills that could probably recycle clothes that some people may be throwing into a bin somewhere. But actually, could that be recycled? We're not just thinking about food here. We're thinking right across the board. You've got some amazing yarn. You've got tweed that you can probably tap into. And with your resources, between the both of you, I'm sure that you can find older people who have knitting skills, who could probably teach those children and young people how to have a ball of wool that may be donated somewhere to a charity shop, for example. I'm not sure how many of those you've got in Dundee now, but just thinking differently. I love what you've done. It's amazing how what you said, David, has actually stuck with me. A plan on a piece of paper or a strategy up there somewhere doesn't make any difference to the person on the ground. That won't make a difference at all. And when you mentioned also about staff within local authorities being tired, I think the same is right across the board. It's absolutely everybody, staff, volunteers. What we need to have is community, isn't it? Where community comes together and gathers and actually helps and assists others. We've got a fantastic project in Carmarthenshire called Incredible Edible, which started up in the north. I think it was around Todmorden, and they grow any piece of land. They'll grow stuff in, and the local schools are now growing. So we've got Boyd groups across the whole of Carmarthenshire where the school children are growing and parents can go and take what they need, leave what they don't need. So. But what incredible work you're doing. And obviously in England and Wales, we have slightly different legislation, but I suppose we're really lucky in Wales because we've got the Future and Wellbeing Act. So, it's like Future Generations and Wellbeing Act, which we work to. I don't really have a question, but it was just an observation really, but amazing. We need more people like Jacky and David around the world, don't we? Thank you.
Thank you, Jacky. That's fantastic. Any more questions, or I might ask Joe to bring in some of the questions from the chat that.
Sorry, can I just respond to that? I mean, there are a charity in particular in Dundee who recycle clothes, yeah. So we work with them, yeah, and we refer people to them, and they refer people to us for food. So I think there's a lesson there. While you can collaborate, don't try to do what another charity is already doing if that is meeting a need. So we thought about doing recycled clothes at one point, but we thought, well, somebody, they're doing it successfully. So I think you've got to be realistic as well, and making sure you're using your resources to the best. I couldn't agree more about the volunteers. Volunteers are fatigued. We are struggling now to find volunteers because they've been through 2.5 years of really, really hard work. And many of them, they just can't give anymore, frankly.
Helen, can I bring you in?
Very quick question from me, and thanks. It's been very interesting, and I've particularly some very clear calls, I think, for funders. So, we work with funders in London, and it's, similarly trying to grapple with how to coordinate responses across, a big geographical area as well as local authorities. You mentioned core funding being so key. I wondered, in the relationships you have now with the funders supporting your work, is it long-term? Are you having to still get lots of short-term bits of funding? Because I think, one thing we're worried about is, all working in this kind of crisis mode that becomes quite normal. And although we might be having more flexible funding, the need for that longer term is kind of really, really key. And I just wondered if, you could just talk a bit more about the kind of funding that you have currently, and if others are getting on board as well. Obviously the Rank Foundation was really key to kind of getting this off the ground.
Yep. Well, I've got, so we currently have some funding from the Scottish Government, which is 3 years funding for a piece of work around faith communities. We have funding from Dundee City Council and Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So we had 2 years, and they've now given us another 2 years funding. That's for our fairness work. Funding from Robertson Trust and Northwood Trust for the food network, and that was 3 years funding. But in terms of core funding, I'm needing to look for more, and we're needing a good solid 3 years to give us the ability to keep doing what we're doing. So although we're in good positions in some ways, we're still quite fragile, and lots of organisations are. There's short-term funding out there. So I've got a 1-year project that we're doing, and that's great. And actually it works for that particular project. So I think we feel a little bit more fortunate. We've had 2 to 3 year funding from most funders. And I had a brief period this year when I just didn't look for funding, which was lovely. It was about 3 months where I didn't have to think about it. But it all comes back, and you're still on that cycle, and that uses up a lot of your time and resources and energies, which is better used elsewhere. So yeah, we could do with a bit more of that longer term, 3 to 5 year. 3 year minimum would be significant and make a big difference to organisations.
Sorry, I think funders should not be looking at projects. They should be looking at organisations that are delivering. And if you look at that organisation and say they're doing great work, they've got a great plan on how they're going to get us out of the cost of living crisis, get through it, then you back the organisation, not the project. And if you back the organisation, why would you do it for 1 year? Why? You would, if you're backing them, you back them for a minimum of 2. And I've heard of somebody backed for 5 years by a funder, a 5-year grant, and I went, that is phenomenal. Because you know what happens? The charity themselves have the confidence then to get on with the real work that they're doing and not have to deal with, I'm going to have to put a funding application in and I spend 2 weeks doing that when I could be out there doing 2 weeks of really thoughtful, positive work, making a difference in the community. So I think the funders need to look at that as a view and not be seduced by, here is a pretty sexy project that's got a year's life on it that we think, is good. It may be a good project, but if the organisation hasn't got the core funding, it won't happen.
Thanks for that question, Helen. And
the way Rank identify those organisations, I'm just going to put this in, is leadership. So they wouldn't have went to Faith in the Community if Jacky had not been there. So if you don't have a good leader and they can trust the leader, then they go, I know this is going to happen. And governance as well. I've seen governance being an issue where you can have a good leader within a project, but in actual fact, the board or the trustees are inept. And there's no other word for it. So Rank had a real thing about leadership, entrepreneurship within the third sector, or enterprise they called it. And also I think governance is very important, because without that, the whole edifice of the charity or project could fall.
Yeah, thanks for that. There's a whole process I think they have around what they call kicking the tires and getting to know the place and getting to know the community and the leaders and community groups. Could we go back to one last question, which we have 1 minute, I think, to respond to, which is a question that I think Annie brought out, but maybe another individual earlier, which is, can you give an example of where somebody in the local authority wasn't sort of on your side and wasn't sort of that interested in partnering, but you were able to turn them around, and what led them to them being turned around in that way?
I don't know. I think our relationships go far back. I can't remember. So,
I've got an example where I'm pushing very hard on flexible childcare just now. So there's no point in having childcare where it's 9 o'clock to 5 if that's not going to help the single mum go back to work or university or college or whatever. So I'm finding the council don't like that terribly, because it means changing the terms and conditions of their nursery staff. But I've also got a flexible childcare organisation in the city who are fantastic. They're a charity, and virtually parents can drop the kids off, different times, different days. It's okay, we can work with this. And that's embarrassing the council, because they can see that that's making a difference to that parent's life, to that child's life, the flexibility of the childcare, whereas their straight-laced way of doing it, I hope the leader of the council's not listening, the straight-laced way they do it means that it's actually a barrier to those people getting into employment or training. The way that the council are adopting that type of 9 o'clock to 5, and you've got to tell me which days, etc. So I haven't won them round yet. That's the answer. They're still.
So that's another one to come back to a few months from now to see how you have, David, and I'm sure you will. So we're already at the time of the end, sadly, but I just wanted to first of all say thank you so much to Jacky and David for just sharing the incredible work and your approach to the work through this last hour and a half. I think you've seen from the chat how useful people have found it. And thank you to the participants for all these sort of comments, sharing, and great questions. And again, we will send this out as a recording because quite a few people asked for that afterwards, if you would like to access it. But otherwise, please follow us at Place Matters to see what other webinars are out there that might be of interest to you. And thank you all for being with us.